The air was thick with the kind of summer heat that made the pavement sizzle, the kind that made even the slightest breeze feel like a gift. On a quiet corner of a neighborhood where people rushed past without looking twice, a boy stood behind a rickety wooden table, his hands sticky with lemon juice and sugar. His name was Lucas Reed, 10 years old, and on this day, he had one mission to sell as much lemonade as possible. His sign was hand-drawn, the letters uneven but bold, written with the kind of determination only a child with purpose could muster. Lemonade, $1 per cup. The paper curled at the edges from the sun, the tape barely holding in place. A small plastic jar sat on the table, half filled with crumpled dollar bills and scattered coins. Every penny in that jar had a destination, and it wasn't for toys or treats. Lucas wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a faint smudge of lemon pulp across his cheek. His small hands worked quickly, pouring, stirring, handing over cups with a hopeful smile. People stopped, dropped $1, gave a nod of encouragement, and walked away, never asking why a boy his age was standing out in the heat instead of playing with friends or cooling off at a nearby pool. But Lucas wasn't thinking about pools. He wasn't thinking about summer break or video games or anything a boy his age should have been thinking about. His eyes flickered to the jar every few minutes, mentally counting, hoping, wishing. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Across the street, a man in a sleek black truck slowed at a stop sign, his hands resting on the wheel. He glanced out the window, the sight of a boy working harder than any 10-year-old should have to catching his attention. For a moment, he watched. Then he made a decision. The door opened and boots hit the pavement. A towering figure stepped onto the sidewalk, his shadow stretching toward the little stand like a wave rolling in. Lucas looked up, and everything changed. Lucas Reed was just 10 years old, but there was a weight on his small shoulders that no child should ever have to carry. He stood behind a simple wooden table, gripping a near-empty jar of coins, his fingers tracing the rim as if willing more money to appear. The sun had been unrelenting all afternoon, beads of sweat forming on his brow. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Most kids his age were inside, sprawled out on their couches watching cartoons or running through sprinklers, laughing as cold water hit their sun-warmed skin. Lucas didn't have time for that. His focus was on the small stack of dollar bills in front of him, knowing it was nowhere near enough for what he needed. Just a few months ago, his world had been different. He had come home from school to the smell of his mother's cooking, to her laughter filling their tiny kitchen, to bedtime stories that made the day's worries disappear. But that warmth had faded into something colder. The home felt quieter now. The laughter was replaced with the soft hum of medical machines. And his mother, Sarah, no longer stood at the stove or tucked him in at night. She spent her days in a hospital bed, weak, tired, her once bright eyes dimmed by pain. Lucas had heard words no child should have to hear: treatment, bills, insurance, overdue. He had watched his mother force a reassuring smile, telling him everything would be okay when he could see in her eyes that she wasn't sure. He had seen his father pacing in the middle of the night, whispering into the phone, asking about options, about payments, about anything that could buy them more time. So Lucas decided to do something about it. He didn't have much, but he had 2 hands, a pitcher, and a recipe his mom had taught him. He had the memory of her telling him, "Hard work always pays off, sweetheart." And he believed her. He spent every afternoon squeezing lemons, stirring in sugar, making the best lemonade he could. The first day, he made $6. The next, 12. It wasn't a fortune, but it was something. And when you're desperate to help the person you love most in the world, something is always better than nothing. People stopped, smiled, and handed him $1. Some dropped a few extra coins. A few asked why he was out there, why he wasn't playing with his friends. He would answer in a quiet voice, "It's from my mom." Some paused, looked at him with softened expressions, and nodded before walking away. Others didn't ask at all, just left a few bills on the table, and walked off without a word. But Lucas needed more than kind gestures. He needed something bigger. And on this particular afternoon, something was about to happen that would change everything. Across town, in a gym filled with the sound of clanking weights and music pounding through speakers, Dwayne Johnson finished a workout, sweat dripping from his brow as he grabbed his water bottle. He was just looking for a quiet drive home. He had no idea that just a few streets away, a 10-year-old boy was standing at a lemonade stand, watching the sky darken and the summer heat fade, wondering if today would be the day he finally made enough to help his mother. And neither of them knew that in just a few moments, their paths would cross in a way that neither would ever forget. Lucas Reed had been standing at his lemonade stand for hours, watching cars roll past, their wheels kicking up little clouds of dust that settled onto the edges of his table. His hands were sticky from the lemon juice, his arms a little sore from stirring, but none of that mattered. He wasn't thinking about the sweat dripping down the side of his face, or the way his legs ached from standing too long. He was thinking about the bills sitting on the kitchen counter home, the ones he had seen his father staring at late at night, rubbing his forehead, as if willing the numbers to change. Lucas waved at another passing car, forcing his best smile. It slowed for just a second, the driver's eyes meeting his for the briefest moment. Then, just as quickly, the car sped up again. He let his hand drop. The hope that had flickered in his chest faded just as fast. A woman with a stroller passed by, offering him a small nod but no stop. A man in a business suit glanced at the stand but didn't even slow his pace. The few who did stop handed over $1, maybe $2. Some just dropped coins into the jar, without saying a word. Lucas thanked every single one of them, holding on to whatever kindness he could find. But as he looked at the jar, barely a handful of crumpled bills and a scattering of quarters, his stomach sank. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the folded sheet of paper he had brought from home. It wasn't just any paper. It was the latest medical bill. The total sat there at the bottom, circled in blue pen, a number far bigger than anything a lemonade stand could fix. He stared at it, his fingers gripping the edges, willing it to shrink, to become something his small hands could actually hold. The sky overhead began to change. The bright blue of the afternoon was fading into something heavier. The warm breeze that had been carrying the scent of lemons and sugar now had a sharpness to it. Lucas heard the wind pick up, rustling the trees, pushing against a flimsy cardboard sign he had taped to the front of his table. Then, without warning, the tape gave out. The sign tumbled forward, landing face down in the dirt. Lucas scrambled to grab it, his fingers pressing into the damp ground as he lifted it back up. A gust of wind nearly took it again, but he held on. His heart beat a little faster. People walked by without noticing. They always did. He exhaled, standing up and brushing the dust from his shorts. He wasn't ready to pack up. Not yet. Then, just as he was about to turn back to his stand, he heard it, the low rumble of an engine, deep, steady, a truck. Lucas looked up. A black pickup slowed as it approached, the tires rolling to a stop just a few feet away. The hum of the engine settled into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the driver's side door opened. A boot hit the pavement, firm, deliberate. Another step followed. Lucas swallowed hard. His hands, still gripping the edges of his sign, tightened just a little. Whoever had just pulled up wasn't just another customer. And in the next few seconds, everything was about to change. Lucas Reed stood frozen, his fingers still gripping the edges of his sign, watching as the door of the black truck swung open. The sound of heavy boots hitting the pavement echoed in his ears, each step deliberate, measured. He didn't know who this man was yet, but something about the way he moved made Lucas hold his breath. Then, the man stepped into the light. Dwayne Johnson, towering, broad-shouldered, the kind of presence that made people stop in their tracks. Lucas had only ever seen him on movie posters or on TV, larger than life, standing in the middle of explosions, throwing punches, flashing that $1,000,000 smile. But here, in the middle of a quiet street, there were no cameras, no special effects. Just a man, standing in front of a 10-year-old boy's lemonade stand. Lucas swallowed, his throat dry. Dwayne looked at the sign, the jars of lemonade, the plastic container filled with bills and coins. His gaze flickered to Lucas, studying him, not with pity, but with curiosity. Then he crouched down, leveling himself with the boy. "You got any good lemonade here, bud?" His voice was deep, steady, but warm. Lucas's brain stuttered for a moment before he finally nodded. "Yes, sir. Best in town." Dwayne grinned. "That's so? Well, I'm a tough critic. Think you can handle that?" Lucas quickly poured a cup, his hands moving fast. He tried not to shake as he handed it over. Dwayne took it, lifted it to his lips, and took a long sip. For a second, he didn't say anything, just let the lemonade sit in his mouth, considering it. Then, with a dramatic sigh, he smacked his lips together. Oh yeah, that's the real deal. Lucas let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He almost smiled. Almost. Dwayne reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet. Lucas expected to see a few bills, maybe a 20. Enough to make a difference for today. But what came next, he never saw coming. Dwayne didn't pull out a 20, or even a 50. Instead, he placed a thick stack of $100 bills on the table. Lucas blinked. His mind couldn't process the amount. Sir, I think you gave me too much, he stammered, pushing the money back toward him. Dwayne shook his head. Nah, that's just about right. That's for a cup of lemonade, right? Lucas's hands trembled as he looked down at the bills. $1,000. Maybe more. His breath hitched. He didn't know what to say. Then Dwayne leaned in, his voice quieter now. I heard what you're doing. For your mom. He glanced at the hospital bill, sitting next to the lemonade pitcher. You're a good kid, Lucas. A real fighter. Lucas felt something rise in his throat. Something he hadn't let out in a long time. He swallowed hard, refusing to cry in front of a stranger, especially this stranger. Dwayne straightened up, but he wasn't done. He reached for his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then looked back down at Lucas. All right, bud, got a question for you. Lucas nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, sir. Dwayne grinned. How would you feel about getting some extra help? Before Lucas could answer, Dwayne turned his phone toward him. The screen was open to his social media. Millions of followers, thousands of people watching in real time. Hey, guys, Dwayne said, his voice steady but filled with something serious. I want you to meet my new friend, Lucas. He turned the camera toward the stand, letting the world see the jars of lemonade, the sign, the near-empty coin jar. This kid is out here doing something incredible. He's selling lemonade to help his mom, who's fighting to get better. And I think we can do something about that, don't you? Lucas's stomach twisted. He had no idea what was happening, but it felt bigger than anything he could have imagined. Dwayne looked straight into the camera. If you're watching this, I want you to do me a favor. Let's help Lucas. Let's help his mom. Let's show them what real kindness looks like. Within seconds, the comments were flooding in. Messages of support. Promises of donations. People asking how they could send money. And just like that, Lucas's little lemonade stand wasn't just a lemonade stand anymore. It was something else. Something that could actually change things. And it all started with a single cup of lemonade. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and faint traces of flowers left behind by visitors who came and went. The walls were lined with quiet voices, the soft beeping of monitors, the occasional shuffle of nurses moving from one patient to the next. But inside one particular room, something was different. Lucas Reed stood in the doorway, his hands gripping the straps of his backpack, his breath unsteady as he stepped inside. His mother, Sarah, lay in a hospital bed, her skin pale, her body weak. But when she looked up and saw her son, something lit up in her tired eyes. She smiled, a fragile thing, but it was real. Lucas, what did you do? Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but it reached him like a thunderclap. Lucas took another step forward, then another, until he was standing right by her bedside. His fingers brushed against the edge of the blanket, as if to remind himself that she was really there, that she was still fighting. His lips pressed together, trying to keep his emotions in check. But there was too much relief, too much joy, too much of everything that had been bottled up for months. I got help, Mom, he said, his voice shaking, but not with fear, just with the weight of what was happening. Real help. And then, from behind him, another presence filled the room. Dwayne Johnson stepped inside, his broad frame making everything else seem small in comparison. He moved with a quiet confidence, but there was something softer in his expression now. He wasn't here as a celebrity. He wasn't here as an action star. He was here as a man who had seen something extraordinary in a 10-year-old boy selling lemonade on the side of the street. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in sight of him, her mind trying to catch up with reality. Dwayne pulled up a chair beside her, resting his forearms on his knees, leaning in just slightly. "You raise an incredible kid," he said, his voice steady, filled with something deeper than kindness. "And don't worry, we got you covered." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. She blinked, but they still spilled over, tracing a path down her cheeks. She wasn't just looking at a man who had played heroes in movies. She was looking at someone who had walked into their lives and changed everything in ways she could never have imagined. Lucas reached for her hand, squeezing it, his own eyes glassy with emotion. And for the first time in a long time, there was no worry about bills, about treatment costs, about what would happen tomorrow. There was only this moment, a moment of relief, a moment of hope. It started with a lemonade stand, just a small wooden table, a plastic jar, and a boy with a heart too big to be measured. Lucas thought he was just selling cups of lemonade to help his mother. He never expected that a stranger would stop and change everything. Dwayne Johnson didn't just buy a drink. He gave a family something they had almost lost: hope. And yet, that wasn't the end of the story. Lucas had spent so many weeks standing behind that little table, watching people walk by, wondering if anyone would care. Now he had an answer. People cared. Kindness existed in ways he had never imagined, and he wasn't about to let it stop with him. But the best part? Lucas wasn't done yet. Inspired by what had happened to him, he turned his lemonade stand into something more, a movement, a mission. With the help of Dwayne and thousands of people who had seen his story, Lucas launched something bigger than a lemonade stand. He created the Lucas Foundation, a fund dedicated to helping families just like his own, one cup of lemonade at a time. One act of kindness can change a moment, but the right act of kindness, it can change a lifetime. And for Lucas Reed, it all started with a lemonade stand and a man who decided to stop. Think about this for a moment. A 10-year-old boy stood on the side of the road, selling lemonade with nothing but a jar of coins and a heart full of hope. He didn't know if anyone would stop. He didn't know if what he was doing would be enough. But he did it anyway, because when you love someone, you do whatever it takes. And then something extraordinary happened. Someone stopped. Someone saw him. Someone cared. And that single act of kindness didn't just help one family. It started something much bigger. Now, ask yourself, how many people do we walk past every day who need help? How many times do we see someone struggling and think, maybe next time? What if you were the person who decided to stop? Right now, there are thousands of kids like Lucas standing behind lemonade stands, setting up bake sales, running charity car washes, all trying to make a difference in a world that sometimes feels too big to change. But the truth is, change doesn't come from one massive act. It comes from small, meaningful moments that add up. It comes from you. So, here's your challenge. The next time you see someone trying to do something good, whether it's a child raising money, a family in need, or even just a stranger who looks like they could use a hand, be the person who stops. Because kindness isn't just something we talk about. It's something we do. If Lucas's story inspired you, share this video. Leave a comment below and tell us about a time when someone's kindness made a difference in your life. And if you believe that small actions can create real change, hit that like button. And if you want to see more stories like this, stories that remind us of the good in the world, make sure to subscribe. Because the world needs more stories like Lucas's. The world needs more people who stop.